Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, boys, girls, and cats, and dogs, and small rodents. Welcome to Sunday Night Live with me, Jonny Lipsham, here at jonnylipshamstudios.co.uk. And with me tonight is the rather marvellous and very striped-looking Rich Cresswell. Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
Awesome. We have your audio. Excellent. Fabulous. How you doing, buddy?
Good. Tired. I hope everyone's doing well, though.
I'm just looking at the at your IKEA unit behind you with your drinks and stuff and your coffee maker. Looks awesome. Very cool. Yeah. So it's your birthday today, isn't it, mate?
It is. Yeah.
Congratulations. Happy birthday. Hope you've had a good day.
It's been busy. It's been productive. It's been a grown-up birthday.
Yeah, kind of a lot less celebrating and just doing things. Yes.
Exactly.
You got any interesting gifts or not really?
I'm drinking one now.
Oh, marvelous.
Cheers.
Is that a Coke and rum, perchance?
It would be. Yeah. Yep. Some 19 crimes.
Oh, nice. Yep. Yeah. Oh, that's cool.
That's very nice. So I'll have one of those this evening with you.
Marvelous. I'm just having a standard cup of tea. But you know, I do have beers. Which I've been at my mother's for Sunday lunch, and I've not seen her since before my birthday. And she said, "Got you a crate of beer for your birthday." So I was just like, "Oh, great!" So brought the crate of beer home, and they're now sitting in the fridge. So we're all set and ready to rock and roll with those. It'll take me about 3 months to get through my crate of beer. So you're getting lots of birthday messages in the chat there, which is cool.
It is, yeah. It's very nice, and it's always appreciated, of course. And happy birthday to you, if it's your birthday today.
Yeah, absolutely. If it's anybody's birthday today, happy birthday to you guys. So yeah, there seems to be a little bit of confusion over the time change. So for you guys in the United States, literally nothing has changed for you because your clocks have not gone back, whereas ours in the UK and in Central Europe have gone back. So for us, this is 11 p.m. in the evening. It's not midnight like it normally would be. So that's why for those of you that are in Europe or in the UK, it's a little bit earlier than normal. So we do this twice a year. We do this in March, and we do this again in the last week of October as well. And then so it'll only be for a period of weeks. So for this Sunday and for Wednesday, the UK time starting will be 11 p.m. and then we'll go back to midnight after that, and then we'll be midnight all the way through until March when it swaps over again. So that way it's always 6 p.m. Central Time, and that means I don't have to change any of my advertising. So I thought I thought, you know what, it's just going to be so much easier if it's me that moves rather than everybody else, and I have to, advertise everything differently. And of course, if I move it to 5 p.m. in the United States, it's going to probably be too early. People won't have finished work, or that kind of thing. So that's kind of my thinking about that. So you're probably wondering. In fact, I think I've seen at least one comment saying, "What is Rich Cresswell doing here?" Well, Rich is a very good friend of mine, and he's always welcome on either of my shows because he has a tremendous amount of knowledge to share with my audience, and I appreciate it immensely. He and I have partnered over the last couple of years on some songwriting and composing challenges, which have been really, really fantastic. So the reason why he's here on a Sunday Night Live is because we've just come to the end of a songwriting challenge for Halloween 2024. And so basically the cutoff point is the end of this show. So when we roll the end credits, if there is such a thing, I don't really do. It's just like an end card. But if we get to that end card and the end theme tune plays, that is the door being closed for entries to the songwriting challenge for Halloween. Entries submitted after that will not be counted. So
Yep, and I'm keeping an eye on it at the moment. I think the last submission we had was from Roger Beckett.
Marvelous. Yeah, I'm glad Roger managed to get in there because I know he had a little difficulty getting in. So that's great that he's managed to get a submission in. So yeah, I did notice that we'd had like 2 or 3 in the last couple of days, which is great. So we've got a decent number.
Yep. I think the last one was submitted at least my time at 5:35 p.m. And yeah, you're absolutely right. There's been a couple that I can see that have uploaded, and I've been keeping an eye on it to make sure there aren't any questions that need answering or anything like that. Which obviously, when we do these challenges, you're always welcome to do. So if you if we're not around, it's not a live stream or something, and you're in that workspace, you can always ask your questions in there, and I'll be keeping an eye on that.
Yeah, absolutely, and myself too. Likewise, that's kind of the way we roll with our challenges because we do kind of make some rules to keep it interesting, and my thinking has always been that if you have limitations, deliberately set limitations and parameters for creativity, you can actually breed more creativity than if you just go, okay, this is just a blank canvas, where do I start? So if you set the parameters, okay, it's going to use this particular scale, or it's going to be in this particular key, you're limiting yourself to start with. And I think having those boundaries and then being able to work within those boundaries can foster a lot more creativity. So that's one of the reasons why I like these challenges so much.
Very much so. And I think I'm expecting some really good stuff this time because I think we made the scale a little bit more approachable.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not as spicy as Lockerian Natural 6 like last time when we did the Halloween challenge, but this time I'm hoping to see some cool stuff from different types of instrumentalists, whether it's vocalists, guitarists, or keyboardists, or
Yeah,
it's going to be cool to see what happens and what people have submitted. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, me too. I'm really excited by this particular year's challenge, because we kind of made it. We gave a few more options than we did last year. Last year it was kind of like it was a fixed scale and that's all you could use. And now this time we're giving a couple of options, which and we're applying a little bit of differentiation, which I think is cool as well. So should open the way for more people to get involved. So I'm really looking forward to what we get, especially from our mixing people and from our remixing people as well. I don't know if we've had any submissions with that regard yet. But yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing the mixes as well. And yeah, that's. I mean, for me, that's kind of an interesting expansion of this kind of concept that we've had, where we're saying, hey, if you want to just do a mix, you can just do a mix, and we'll evaluate the mix, and there's a chance of a prize that way. I think that's really cool.
Yeah, yeah. I think I know there's a lot of people out there that like mixing, or they write their own music and mix it. And it'd always be nice to see what people can do with maybe just things like, stock tools. Maybe that's an idea, for mixing.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I mean, yeah, future challenges maybe. For sure. Yeah, Cal is saying that US falls back next week, next Sunday. So yes, next Sunday we'll be back to normal. So it's just this Sunday and Wednesday that are the affected shows.
yeah,
Cool.
and then we can all reconvene at the normal times.
Yep, back to the normal midnight fun times. Neil's saying something here. Could be Rich is 2 inches from his mic, while Jonny is nearly 2 feet from his mic. No, I'm not 2 feet from my mic at all. I don't know where you're getting that from at all. I'm actually almost. I mean, you can't see it because I deliberately placed my mic a little bit at a certain angle, so it's actually out of shot slightly. So you don't actually see it. You can see kind of like the top here. But the mic is actually a little bit out of shot from the camera, and it's like probably about 5-6 inches away.
We've got different mics.
Yeah. Yep. Mine's a Rode NT1A is what I'm using. And I've actually got the gain cranked. I'm looking at it in OBS just now, and I'm peaking at minus 2 dB. So I think I'm pretty up there. I don't actually think I can go any louder. Let me take a look at that and see, can I actually go a little louder if people are asking me to go louder? I don't know that people are asking for me to go louder, but I can go like a smidge louder.
I don't know. Maybe it's proximity or something,
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. That's always a possibility. It's actually really, really hard to get a good balance between me and somebody else coming on, because we're doing this through Skype, and so Skype has its own like limiters and things like that, and its own loudness normalization standards, and so we have to kind of work around that as well. And then of course there's YouTube and their loudness and all of that as well. So we're kind of fighting a little bit on two fronts there with trying to get a balance between our mics. It's really almost impossible.
So a quick one, because Dwayne's just put in the chat there about a mix that he started, and he's saying that he's run out of time, but we still have till the end of the show, Dwayne. So
yeah, you do.
I'm not sure, what state it's at the moment, and whether you feel you can get it done by the end of the show. But if you can, that'd be awesome.
Do it. Yep. Yeah, if you want to get it in, Dwayne, you have a totally legit excuse to kind of duck out of the show, and you can just go ahead and finish off your mix. That's a totally legit reason to do that. For sure. DJ says it's when you turn away from the microphone, it's hard to understand what you're saying. And that'll also be the Scots as well. And the fact that I have been drinking today, I shared a bottle of wine with my mother today. So we didn't mean to both neck the bottle, but it was just like going to be, let's just have a glass of wine with our lunch. But no, a glass of wine turned into half a bottle each. So
yeah, there's a bit of a difference between like a well-spoken Scotsman and a well-spoken English person.
Definitely. And the fact that I have spent most of my life outside of Scotland, living in England, so my accent is a complete mess anyway. It's an amalgamation of Scots. There's a little bit of Cornish in there because I lived in Cornwall for a bit for a few years, and then there's Southeast London, mate, because I live down there.
Mm-hmm.
And then, there's a little bit of Liverpool because I lived in Liverpool very briefly.
And you live in a fairly softly spoken part of Scotland as well, because Edinburgh's kind of been, sort of well known, isn't it, for being sort of the posh speaking Scots, for a better phrase.
Yeah, there's posh speaking parts of Edinburgh, like Morningside, for example, which is on the west side of the city, where it's definitely posh. I was in the southeast when I lived in Edinburgh, southeast side of Edinburgh, and now I'm out in Midlothian, where the accent again is very different. It's much stronger here, and of course the other thing that I do, and because I've been doing this for so long for my videos, is I dial back my accent a wee bit so that I can make myself more understandable to a wider audience. I think maybe I started doing that kind of subconsciously at the start of making my videos. But yeah, if I don't dial it back, then it's fairly strong. So let's see. I'm just reading through the chat as well. Bobby Booth said he did the mixing one. I said, but the strings and horns were hard for me to get them sounding like they came from an orchestra. You got any maybe suggestions that he could employ in the future?
I think the way I look at strings and how they can be useful is that I tend to apply different, say for example, just some real basic, like different reverbs depending on the articulation. If you're thinking in the context of a mix, because if you've got short sort of stabby strings, if you've got staccatos, spiccatos, and runs and things like that, having like a long reverb tail is probably not necessarily desirable because it kind of masks the sound of the instrument. So you're kind of blanketing it too much. Whereas with, say, longer strings, so chords, legato strings, these can have like tons of reverb on them, loads of splosh, as Christian Henson puts it, because they all orchestras essentially benefit from the room that they're in.
That's true. So,
sometimes just picking the right reverb can be the make and break of it. So picking the right reverb, maybe something that's more transparent. There's some really good ones in open air.
Yeah, there's some nice concert hall reverbs in open air.
Yeah, there's some impulse responses in open air which kind of are very close, if not almost exactly like some of the very, very expensive Bricasti hardware reverbs.
Yeah.
And they are supremely expensive, but they do a very good job. And some of the Lexicon hardware units as well. So you can get that sound essentially from open air. I tend to avoid using the room reverb or something similar to that, just because I see that as more of a general purpose reverb as opposed to putting something in a space. And that's where open air kind of really wins. Probably, I think I've said this before, but I think it's probably my favorite stock instrument. Effect, rather, I should say. Yeah. So whether you're doing, strings, winds, brass, that kind of stuff, or you're doing vocals or guitar, I'd always look to open air to put something in a space.
Yeah.
There's lots of things that you can do to adjust it as well, and it has a very, very immediate impact on the overall sound just by adjusting something like the pre-delay or having the EQ inside it, so you can EQ the reverb inside open air itself. It's just very, very versatile.
the ability to EQ inside the plugin, I think, is one of the real big plus points to open air. Other than the fact that you can make use of impulse responses from actual rooms, which I think is terrific. Being able to EQ the reverb, I think, is really, really crucial. And it's one of the reasons why I don't use the room reverb quite so much, because you can't do that. You have to follow that up with an EQ plugin, which I don't mind. I actually have an effects chain that has that. It just basically brings in room reverb plus an EQ with a preset that low passes and high passes the reverb. But it would be great if room reverb actually had an EQ built into it, even if it was just high and low pass filters.
Yeah, I mean, even like a 3-band EQ would be like nice,
Yeah, so you can scoop the mids. Yeah,
or even just like a shelving filter, something like that.
I suppose, if you wanted to get like some shimmer out of the reverb.
Yeah, and I would say to folks, don't sleep on open air, because it's probably one of the most versatile stock plugins in Studio One. It's not necessarily just a reverb in the traditional sense. You can take, say, for example, just say you've got a sample, okay, that maybe it's a snare or a hi-hat or something. Just experiment and just try dragging that onto open air, the actual instrument plugin itself, or rather the effects plugin.
Yeah.
Because it will pretty much take any wave file or audio loop that you've got on your computer, and it will pull from that and create some really, really interesting effects. So imagine if you could to consider it's almost take the snare, put the snare on to open air, and then sing through that. The snare drum becomes essentially almost like a resonator for the voice. You can get some really cool effects.
Yeah, I've heard a few people talking about doing that, kind of using a snare or a floor tom as a resonator for a vocal track, and it's not something I've ever really tried or explored, to be honest. I think the only time I've ever done it is actually effectively reamp a vocal by basically recording the vocal, putting a snare drum on its side in front of a speaker, and then mic up the whole thing from the snares side of the snare drum. So you're recording the vocal affecting the snares of the snare drum, and then you're effectively reamping the whole thing through the snare, a physical snare drum. I've done that before for a particular effect, but I've never really thought of using the snare as effectively a resonator in a impulse response. That's a really cool idea.
Yeah, absolutely. And you use all sorts of stuff, with open air. Cabinet impulse responses if you're a guitarist.
Yeah.
It does work. It's very good.
Yeah.
So question there from DJ.
Yeah.
DJ Vu. He says, and I appreciate the compliment, but I'll read it as it says it. You make great productions. I have a question. Do you have any golden rules for approaching the mix, and do you focus on the perfect sound of the production stage like me? So you're looking at the production stage. What I tend to do is I tend to sort of visualize things as a box.
Yeah.
And that box is all of the frequencies. And what I generally do is I sort of, want for a better phrase, I'm using an alternative analogy here and then circle back, but it's like throwing spaghetti against the wall to see what sticks. And then I get all those bits of spaghetti that's stuck on the wall, and I throw them in this little box, build up these frequencies, and then I carve out frequencies. So although I do sort of, I guess you call it like hybrid orchestral type music, I actually come from a sound design background. I come from a making weird sounds, and also doing a lot of sort of very heavily processed electronic music. So the way that I've always done it is almost from a sound design electronic musician's perspective, and never from, want for a better phrase, a classical perspective in terms of mixing. So when I've got say bass elements, because it's not always necessarily going to have a traditional bass, I'm going to have a bus or a bus folder, as we tend to use in Studio One now, for all of the bass elements. Likewise for all of the different percussion elements, and maybe synth elements and string elements and winds and brass and all the rest of it. And what I generally tend to do is I get a rough balance of what I think each of those sections should sound like, and I'll tend to use automation to kind of like drive the performance in terms of volume and panning and all the basic stuff. I know some people have seen some of the things that I've done on Studio One, and one of the things I'd like to point out is I often don't use a lot of plugins. I kind of work with frequencies and sounds and how each sound works with each other. So if I have strings and the strings kind of sound a little bit too much like they were made for Grieg or something like that, and I need something that's a bit more Beethoven, I'll just pick a different library, because the source sounds more important than me fiddling around with it afterwards. If you can do that, then that's obviously fantastic, but it's always going to be about filling up those frequencies. So, we've got the low sub basses. Never forget making use of things like sine waves for sub bass, even if you're doing like live style music, like rock and roll, heavy metal, even jazz, because you can have a kick drum and have that triggering a sine wave, just to give you a little bit of oomph underneath, without having to EQ the sound itself. Which means that, and I know people are probably aware of this, but every time we EQ something, every time we essentially filter it, we're adjusting the phase of that instrument.
That's true.
So just adding a sine wave to it, sort of something that you actually won't really hear. It's more of a feel thing. That takes care of a lot of the low end stuff. And it gets a little bit easier as you go higher up the frequency spectrum. It's more forgiving. But the low end is kind of like the important bit, the bit that everybody seems to have difficulty with and they struggle with. But I think what happens is, by trying to fix it and doing lots of different EQ techniques and maybe adding saturation to trick the ear into, identifying the different notes in the low end and all the rest of it, we miss the fundamental note of whatever bit of bass is playing or whatever part of the song is playing. So use a sine wave. It's the cleanest sort of bass sub sound that you can probably do. No EQing, no special things on it, just a sine wave, and maybe like your attack and decay, attack, sustain, delay.
So you could use something like the tone generator with a gate sidechained.
You could do that, or you could just simply use Mai Tai.
Or Mai Tai, yeah.
Yeah, use Mai Tai. It gives you lots of control. Use the filter. There's a couple of different filters in Mai Tai, which obviously you can get different sort of tonal results from. So you've got basically like the low pass, the 24 dB per octave filter. There's couple of those. There's a 12 dB, and then obviously you've got all the high ones and all the rest of it. But we're talking about sub. No one really cares about the high pass filters. But just a single oscillator, and if you're using it for the sub bass, by default, I think when you open up MyTie, there's a little button that sits underneath the oscillator, and it says RP on the little button there.
Yeah.
And it'll be highlighted. That basically means random phase. You want to turn that off because you want the phase to return to the beginning every single time, and that will give you a better result.
Good point. Yeah.
That applies to actually anybody that's doing electronic music or anything kind of hybrid or whatever. If you've got the ability to reset the phase each time a new note is played, use it.
Yeah, I've always wondered what that RP button does. So now I know. I've just learned something that I didn't know about MyTie. So that's pretty cool. See, this is what this show is all about. This show is all about education. So sometimes we educate ourselves and sometimes we educate you guys. And, that's what I love about what we do here. It's not just about me didactically pushing out information. You guys are pushing out information back to me as well. And so that's a very fine example of something that I didn't know about MyTie. So that's very, very cool. Just Bob has a question. He says, does Studio One 7 have anything within some of the new stuff that act as a stereo enhancer? He still has not upgraded yet, and he's looking for basically something that will do stereo widening. There are plugins already in Studio One that will give you that. There's a couple of options that you can use that have been around in Studio One for a long time. One is the binaural pan, which is a decent option. But here's the thing with stereo widening plugins as a rule. Some are better than others. So some of this won't apply to necessarily every stereo widening plugin that you're going to find. But what a lot of stereo widening plugins do, all they do is they just turn up the sides. It's essentially a little bit of a mid-side processor, but it doesn't actually do any processing. It just turns up the volume of the sides. And then that tricks your ears into believing that your mix is therefore much wider than it actually is. And that can in itself create problems with phase, especially if you use a lot of stereo widening. And then when you collapse your mix to mono, because you want to always do a mono check of your mix to make sure that your mix always has mono compatibility, because let's face it, even if you've got a stereo system and your music is being played back on a stereo system, if that's in the lounge and your listener, your consumer of your music goes into the kitchen, by the time the sound arrives in the kitchen, after having bounced off every surface in between the lounge and the kitchen, by the time it gets there, it's collapsed to mono anyway. So what you don't want is you don't want that collapsing to mono to lose elements of your mix. So that's why, either mixing in mono or doing regular pit stop checks for your mix in mono is really, really, really critically important. But stereo wideners, quite oftentimes, all they do is they just turn up the sides. So what's the solution here? For me personally, the solution is to make sure that the EQ and the phase of your mix is done. So don't fool yourself into thinking actually the solution with certain things like getting that nice wide guitar sound is to use a stereo widening plugin to get that. It's not. It's actually good EQ separation between all of your guitars that you have in your song. So if you've got 5 or 6 guitars, you want to make sure that each one of those guitars is really, really well separated. And so again,
I've got a really, really easy trick. And you don't even need to write it down because you won't be able to forget it. But if you make use of the mid-side plugin, or rather the effects chain that's in Studio One, everyone's got this. Pull that in and put an EQ on each side. Okay, so one's going to be doing the bit in the middle, and then the other one's going to be in the side, the bit on the side. What you want to basically do is you're essentially wanting to try and monoize the lower frequencies.
So they're in the
giving
center.
giving the higher frequencies the appearance of being more separated. Okay, and it's really easy. So just on the side EQ, okay, all you're going to do is a 6 decibel per octave slope. So this is a a low cut or a high pass, depending on how you want to play it. At around about generally between I'd say 250 hertz. So everything below 250, okay, on the sides, you're basically cutting the bass out completely. It's being eradicated. That basically takes the bass out of the side, brings it into the center, because that's where the focus is now. And the sides, because they're still there, have the appearance or the auditory appearance of being sort of further apart. And I don't care what you're working on, what type of music, it always works.
It does always work. Yeah, mid-side processing is definitely a great way to get that much wider effect without using a stereo widening plugin, and also retaining the phase of your mix overall. So when you do collapse it to mono, it's still got that integrity. So yeah, mid-side processing definitely is definitely another option. But yeah, you can certainly go down the route of making sure that all of your EQ separation of all of your elements is good, and that you have good mono compatibility. So some people, like myself, for quite a while, I don't do it quite so much anymore, but certainly I did. There was a long period of my mixing career where I did like maybe 70% of my mix in mono. And then that would force me to make sure that I separate every element, so that I can hear every element of the mix really, really clearly. And then when you pop it back out to stereo, it sounds a lot wider, not just because you're hearing it in stereo for the first time in a great while, and there is that, obviously, you need to be aware of, that you're not fooling your ears, but also, because you've separated everything in mono, you tend to get much clearer separation of your elements of your mix when it's in stereo. And the byproduct is mono compatibility is there, because you've been doing most of the mix in mono. So
yeah,
probably
exactly.
a combination of those two things.
Think of what the rotor plugin does.
Yeah.
I mean, essentially, it's moving things in that sort of 3D space around, and it's almost like essentially it's a panning trick, right?
Yep.
So it's panning and panning and panning, either very slow or very fast, depending on how you've got it set. That makes it sound wider, right?
Yeah.
Than it actually is. Yeah, it still exists within the same stereo field.
Yeah.
It's in exactly the same place, but it's a trick of the ear.
It's an
That's all
illusion.
you're doing with the mid-side processing. Is you're kind of doing the same thing without having things whirling around your head.
Yeah, I mean, both of what we're advocating here is effectively an aural illusion of extra width. I mean, some of this you can do some of this at the recording phase. So if you're recording like an acoustic guitar, one thing you can do is you can do a second dub of your acoustic guitar part, playing pretty much exactly the same thing as your first pass, and then you just pan them far left, far right. Give them a little bit of a different EQ, or record with two different guitars. This is what my dad does. My dad has a massive collection of acoustic guitars. So he will do his first pass with a Taylor, and then his second pass will be done with a Guild or a Gibson, or one of the new Fender Acoustasonics. And so he then puts one on the left, one on the right. You've got two different sounding guitars with slightly different woods, captured with the same microphone. So you've got that, at least a bit of unity between the two guitars. But, those guitars sound wide without you doing any mid-side processing.
Yeah, and things are going to I think when the things are in sort of like in the higher frequencies, they always stand the chance of sounding wider if they've got a bright upper end. With like loads of like nice harmonics that are pleasing to the ear and all the rest of it. When you've got think of the stereo field, right? How can anything be wider than like your ears?
True. Yeah.
Your brain's the bit that does all the processing of, in terms of what you hear. That's why things sound differently on a CD or a record or on the internet, let's say, than they do when you go and watch a band play live.
Yeah.
Because you're experiencing the sound bouncing off the walls from different directions. That's very different to listening to the same band, even if it is a live performance from two speakers.
Yeah.
Yes, it's very nice because you can hear the performance, and it's it's a totally different beast. But when you listen to a recording, this is why I guess recording engineers, mixing engineers, and all the teams that make up the production team have a very kind of challenging job on their hands, because they're essentially trying to compete with the live performance, which inherently, most cases, gives you the better result because you get to experience everything from all directions.
Yeah.
And that's really why, I guess, we saw the advent of things like surround sound and Dolby Atmos and binaural audio and that sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, there was kind of this race to maybe like 15, 20 years ago, where a lot of bands that had been successful in the 80s and 90s were suddenly re-releasing their catalog in binaural. So they were doing like binaural or 5-to-1 surround mixes of their music. I know that Steely Dan have just released most of their classic records in Atmos and in binaural.
Yeah, I think the first kind of surround thing that I ever bought was Dark Side of the Moon, when they did a 5.1.
Yeah.
Kind of like master of it, remaster. And it sounded literally no different, other than the fact that obviously it came out of different speakers. So
yeah,
it was interesting. It was a different experience for sure. Would I say it was a religious experience? Not even close.
No.
It's a bloody good album, but sometimes these things like Atmos and surround sound and these sort of head tracking devices and stuff, it's cool, it's neat, but ultimately, I've always said this, mix in stereo first. Get good at doing that before you start thinking about all these other things, techniques and whatnot.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, for as much as, I'm happy that we have Dolby Atmos integrated into Studio One from 6.5, it's not something I do because none of my clientele are asking for Atmos mixes of stuff that we work with. What I work with is jazz, and people don't want to listen to jazz in Atmos. They don't want, a tenor saxophone solo to suddenly appear from behind them to the right. Because that's not necessarily appropriate for the genre of music. I mean, I think if your music is you're doing an Atmos remix of music that's then going to be used in something like a THX cinema or something like that, then yeah, kind of justified. You kind of want the music to follow the action on screen. So yeah, I can see the value of that. But if it's just like a jazz record, like, I don't know, Chris Potter quartet or something like that, then no, you don't want Chris Potter to be playing the head in front of you and then his solo comes from behind you. No.
Yeah, I think I've mentioned this before, but I think the thing that I kind of would sort of caution people with is when it comes to mixing for, say, unusual speaker setups, because let's be honest, the normal speaker setup right now, the default is two speakers, right? It's either two speakers on your ears or two speakers in front of you. or behind you, depending on who you're looking at.
Yeah.
But but when we talk about Atmos and stuff like that, we can put things in some really weird positions. And of course, a drummer's arms are only so long.
Yeah, exactly.
So, when one of his arms is over here and one of his arms is over here and he's playing the cymbals, is that
It's not natural.
is it natural? Is it doing the recording the justice that it deserves? I mean, artistically, the artist may say, well, we actually really like that, and that's what we want.
Yeah.
The problem therein lies is that if anyone was ever to go and watch that band live, they're going to be expecting a man with two arms that are both 10 feet long.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's just not going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I think that the tool is great, and it's great that it's there, because it then means that people that are working in Atmos professionally, because they work in cinema, and they do Foley mixes and stuff like that for film. Yeah, this is going to make Studio One completely accessible to them, whereas they would use something like Nuendo or Pro Tools. Now there's the option of Studio One can now begin to enter that market. So
I think when it comes to doing film and game music and that sort of thing, I think Cubase and Nuendo are probably
number one. Yeah,
because I mean, let's be honest, like Nuendo is what Cubase is supposed to be. Cubase is kind of like an offshoot of Nuendo.
Yeah, I agree with that. You probably get Wolfgang Kundras to agree with that too.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty sort of well and understood that Nuendo's always had sort of like the more technical features when it comes to writing music and editing and performing music for that sort of stuff for picture.
Yeah.
But that's why it's a heck of a lot more expensive.
It's what, nearly £1,000 or something now.
Somewhere in that region. I've got a really old version, like 6 or something.
Yeah, it's not a program I ever touched. I used Cubase for like the longest time, from like version 1 all the way through to whatever version number it was in 2013. I don't remember what it was, because they had like Cubase, and then they had this little offshoot called Cubase SX, which went through 3 versions. Which, by the way, friends of mine like Matthias and Arndt were instrumental in coding Cubase SX.
Mm-hmm.
And they obviously now are the Studio One software team in Hamburg. And yeah, so I don't recall what, but I never touched Nuendo.
I think that the Nuendo is, or at least when it was when I used it, and at least it was extremely good at doing very sort of task specific things, and sort of batch commands and all the rest of it. It was very good at doing that sort of thing. But for the average person, is going to be of absolutely no use to them.
It's not a songwriter's dog.
I think that's kind of where I think Studio One, amongst others, to be fair, is such a good DAW, because it makes use of or it takes into consideration, I should say, lots of different techniques that people might use a DAW for, and gives them sort of intuitive tools to be able to achieve those tasks without sort of cluttering things up. We've always had sort of a relatively modular workspace within Studio One, where we've been able to kind of, show and hide the mixing console and the browser and the track list and the, a lot of these things are now becoming detachable. Like recently the browser.
Yeah.
And some people have been screaming for this to happen for a long time. And for some people that's going to be amazing. I've used the detachable browser probably once,
Yeah.
but again,
Yeah.
everyone's going to use it differently. The new features, and
Yeah.
we see from time to time people will say, "Well, what's the point of this and what's the point of that?" But my argument has always been it's different strokes, different folks.
Yeah.
We're going to use things for different reasons. You're not going to use Studio One the same way that I use it,
Yeah.
but the tools are there.
The tools are
If you
there, and
want
that's
it.
the important thing is the fact that there is a very broad tool set for a very wide user experience. Every time there's a new Studio One release, you see it in comments on Facebook or on release videos like mine. I get comments all the time saying, "Oh, there's nothing in this release for me," or "There's nothing in this for me," or it's because you're not using Studio One the same way I am, or you're not using the Studio One in the same way that somebody else is. Somebody else will comment, "Oh, this is brilliant. Finally, that feature request I made, 3 years ago has now been added. This is great. This is wonderful. I'm so happy about this version." And then, other people will just be like, "Well, I'm just a mix engineer. I'm not interested in the arranger track. I'm not interested in, the scale tools and all of that stuff,
I think I was trying to think of an analogy off the top of my head because I love analogies because that usually helps paint a picture.
Yep.
But it's a little bit like, and I'm trying to be sort of generic. It's like going into a supermarket in Midlothian
Like Scott
and shouting at the top of your lungs, "I'm never coming in here again because you don't sell iron brew." Before they've even looked on the shelf to see if they do, just to simply make a completely pointless point.
Yeah.
And walk out again. It's just it's kind of it is pointless.
Yeah.
I think if you like something and you want to sing it from the rooftops, do so. Because positive comments are never going to hurt anybody. There's always going to be people that disagree, but that's up to them as to whether they want to deal with those people. But it's the old age saying, and all of our mothers and fathers hopefully have told us this at some point. If you haven't got anything nice to say, don't say it at all.
Exactly. I live by that. Yeah, totally. Mostly because if I did say the thing that I was thinking, there would be the old back of the hand around the back of the head from my wonderful, very Jewish mother. So, there's always that kind of helps remind me not to say the thing that should be left unsaid because there's just no need for it to be said. But that said, on the kind of point that we're kind of alluding to with, feature requests and that kind of thing, answers.personas.com has been in read-only mode for a few weeks, maybe nearly 2 or 3 months now. But we now finally have a brand new feature request section that you can go and check out. It's feedback-software.personas.com. If you go there, you can now make your feature requests in pretty much exactly the same way that you could before on the old Answers site. It looks sleeker. It looks better. It looks less homemade, in my opinion. And it's very well moderated and looked after. But it's not the place if you have a technical support problem. So if you have Studio One crashing or something like that, or room reverb is not reverbing or something like that, don't put that in there. I know you're kind of going to think, "Oh, but it's feedback and that's feedback." No, it isn't. Well, it kind of is, but it's not. It's a technical support problem. So something not working in Studio One, or Studio One is crashing, or you're encountering unexpected behavior, that's where you make a support ticket.
I think it's really easy if you just think about it. If you think about what is it you want. So I need support. I'd like to give feedback. They're clearly two different things.
Yes.
And in the words of all millennials all over the world, the new Answers stop personas is it's pretty sick.
It is. It's very, very cool. If you give me a second, folks, I will let you all take a look at it. It's very, very cool. So let me go over to screen over here, and you can see me at the top there. Rich will be back in just a second. But this is what it now looks like. And you can even log in here if you click. This will have like a little fake kind of invisible kind of person avatar, faceless person avatar. You click on this, you can log in with your my.personas.com credentials, so you don't even need to create a new account or have a new password or anything like that. There are a couple of things here to bear in mind, which are very, very important. Otherwise, this experience will not work for you very well at all, and you'll just end up getting frustrated. If you have a feature request, this is the button you click on here. And when you click on this, this gives you some information. This bit is very important. Before you post, if you have a question about your product key, product registration, or wish to report a possible bug, please, instead of asking here, make a support request from your account. Question and answers, communities forum. This is actually borrowed text from the previous system, so don't worry too much about that. There is the community forum as well. And then there's issues with Apple M1 Mac. Read this article first. If all of that is still okay and you're just like, yes, what I actually want is I want this brand new plugin concept that I have thought up, and I think it would be really great if Studio One had it, or this is something else that I have seen in another DAW that I think would be really valuable to Studio One, then this is where you do that, and then you hit the submit button. That's the first thing to take note of. Second thing to take note of is this little link at the top here that says, tell us how we're doing. So this is where feedback and feature request are separated. Okay. So if you click on this guy, you'll get this. You'll get the progression of not very happy to I love it. And then you can provide some feedback. So Studio One is really, really great. It's fantastic. But I would really like to see, I don't know, better hyperthreading use or something like that. Or you'd like to see more, more responsive plugins, or a 7-band EQ, or a 10-band EQ, or something like that. So if you've got something that you think we could improve, like I would like it if it didn't take so long to start up. For example, like if when you start up Studio One, it takes like 2 minutes for you, or 3 minutes or more for Studio One to actually go from clicking on the icon to the start page appearing. If you think that's taking too long, this is something you can put in here. And you can say, hey, it'd be great if we could speed up that startup process. So that's kind of different. But again, that's also something that you could make legitimately into a support ticket as well, because there could actually be a reason why it's taking so long to go through the startup process. It could be that your sound sets are actually installed somewhere in iCloud or OneDrive or something like that, and Studio One is trying to scan an online platform, which of course it doesn't do. It won't scan a virtual drive like that. And so, or if it does, it will take a very, very long time because an online platform is way too slow. So, you could be stuck in the startup menu, the startup procedure for ages. You don't want that. So that's kind of something else. That would be a technical support thing, which you would make a support ticket about, and then we would give you some instructions, or our support team would give you instructions on how to fix that. But yes, it's very, very cool. Check this out for sure, would be my opinion. And now we're back with Rich on the screen.
I noticed something on the feature request things. One of the top things there was autosave in the background, but I was aware of, at least correct me if I'm wrong, but we've already had that for some time, right?
Saving background, yes, saving background. It still
And I think,
works.
yeah, and I think one of the things that, if I remember correctly, people were sort of a little bit perturbed about the little notice that used to come on the little dialogue box saying that it was auto saving for you. And people are saying, well, could it do that without the window popping up? So they kind of did that, and I think some people are then thinking, oh, it's not auto
It's not auto
saving
saving,
anymore.
yeah, because I'm not getting a prompt that says it's doing it. Yes, yeah. That goes back to one of those things where, you know, some people be like, can we not have that dialogue box because it's just distracting? And then another group of people say, it might be distracting for you, but for me, it makes sure that I have a visual cue that says this is auto-saving. It's actually happening. So, you know.
I think it'd be kind of cool, though,
Swings
whilst
and
it's
roundabouts.
auto-saving, we get, like, you know, the confetti that you get when you complete a form online.
Yes. There you go. That would be something to put in the feature request page there. For sure. I like that.
And the old Windows XP sound, you know, the ta-da.
Oh,
You know,
the
when it's
ta-da.
the mix
Yeah,
down.
that was very cool. I liked some of those Windows XP sounds. And I was, you know, a little bit disappointed when a lot of those sounds did not make it into future builds of Windows. I've been asked to put the link to feedback dash
Gert's got a
software.
question, though. He's asking the question. I can answer this pretty quickly. Because he's asking about changing the tuning from standard to 432.
Oh, yeah.
By default, there isn't. I think you
Correct.
can do it in Notion, I believe.
You can do it in Notion, yes.
Yeah, but in Studio One, I don't believe that there's any possible way unless at the instrument level, and if that provides it.
You would have to do it from the start of production, to be honest. You'd have to detune everything at the start. In my opinion, that would be the best way to achieve that is, you know, if you're using real instruments, calibrate your tuner so that your tuner has A equals 432. There are tuners that do that, and then tune your guitars, your trumpets, your saxophones to that particular value if that's what you want to do. Keyboards and synthesizers, it's a little bit more tricky. Although most of them have a global transpose, not all keyboards and synthesizers have a global tuning. Some do, some don't. So the only other way inside of Studio One in which you can do this is you can go to select each track in the track inspector, and then in the track inspector you can just detune by the right amount of cents for you to get down to 432. So you're going to have to do a little bit of math to get the correct value for getting from 440 down to 432.
Yeah. Another potential way of doing it as well, although it's a bit, I would say this is a bit janky, but it depends on, I don't know what you end up with, but there are some surprisingly very good plugins out there that enable you to detune or uptune, shall we say, your individual sounds.
Yep.
But you could, in essence, stick that on the master bus.
Yeah, you could do that. Yeah, you could do that.
You know, there are some out there that do a very good job of tuning. They give you different sort of algorithms, much like we have with the, you know, obviously with the different algorithms that are available in Studio One already. So you could certainly try it out. And if any of these plugins do give you a trial, I'm not suggesting that this is, you know, the be all and end all. It's better to do it at the instrument level, but you could certainly try it out and see how things go.
Yeah. The other thing to bear in mind, and I'm sure folks that prefer to work at a lower tuning point, if you are working with a song that has already been recorded at 440 and you just want to basically detune that song, beware, because there are inherent dangers that are created by the harmonic series that you need to take into account. If you're starting the song with everything starting at 432 and the whole production process starts with 432 all the way through to the completion, you don't have this problem. But if it's been recorded at 440 and you're wanting to detune it to 432, you're going to encounter issues with the harmonic series because of the way the harmonic series works. You will get even and odd overtones that are now going to be out of tune, which means certain key signatures just are not going to sound good. And now this is not me basically going back to that argument of, what 432 represents. There are plenty of videos on that. Go check out Adam Neely's channel. He has 2 fantastic videos on 432. Really, really good videos on pros and cons of 432. And by the way, I will make a disclaimer straight away. I actually happen to agree with Adam's conclusions from his videos. So go and check those out for yourself and dive into those because they are very, very good. He's very, very thorough. He is not just a musician, he's a musicologist, and he's a really, really, really top-rate researcher. So, his opinion, I think, has a lot of weight. My personal opinion, I'm not really going to go into very much. I don't think it warrants it here. Suffice to say, just be aware if you are detuning something that's already recorded at 440 to 432, the harmonic series will get shifted, and therefore the balance between the even and odd overtones will also mathematically and or sonically change, which will make some key signatures sound out of tune and others
and
sound
if you're
dark.
using virtual instruments, i.e. Virtual instruments that are essentially pretending to be live instruments, strings, brass, winds, that kind of thing.
Yep.
Avoid sample libraries that aren't recorded in such a way.
Yep.
As Johnny's saying there, maybe opt for something more like, the sort of physical modeled stuff that allows you to do the tuning. Like a good example would be SWAM.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
So they do a lot of physical model things that sound pretty darn convincing.
Yeah.
But if you're not using that and you're using synths, I think the majority of sort of synths will probably do it. I think where you tend to have issues is romplers.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, which are basically using a combination of synthesis and pre-recorded samples.
Yeah.
Spread over the keyboard. They're going to be standard tuning.
Yeah, and so especially if they've made if when they've sampled, their sampling process means that when they go up to the next octave, it's just a copy of the earlier samples transposed. Then you could certainly encounter issues there too, I would have thought.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, the 432 thing is a huge debate. There's lots of musicological debates. There's lots of pseudo spiritual debates on the subject as well. And then there's some psychological analyses that have been done, which I suggest everybody go read up on it. Even if you broadly already as an a priori are of the opinion that 440 is where it should be and not 432 or 416 or some other particular value. Go read up on why we ended up with 440. Because it's actually a really, really interesting story to start with, how we ended
Absolutely.
up with a broadly agreed consensus of 440. Now I say broadly agreed because there are still some countries in the world that don't subscribe to equal temperament, and therefore they wouldn't subscribe to A equals 440. So
yeah, Peter asked a question there, because I did mention an unusual name there, SWAM.
SWAM, yeah.
And it is exactly that, SWAM. It's a SWAM engine. So it's by Physical Modeling, which is a company that makes physical modeled instruments. And the engine, the sort of like the instrument that people use, a little bit like if you know East West and the Opus engine.
Yeah.
Kind of like that kind of deal.
Yeah.
But it's very very powerful and useful instruments, and they're not samples, although I think there are certain elements of it that may be. But it's actually very very well physical modeled instruments.
Yeah, I think I had heard of them before because I liked their methodology for how they capture sounds. So yeah, I've heard of them before. All right, so we are past the hour. In fact, we're 15 minutes nearly past the hour. So first of all, I want to say a big thank you to Rich for dropping in on tonight's show. It's always a pleasure having you here, and
Cool.
you're always welcome to just come and pitch in if any time you want to be honest, because you add value to what I do, and also it means I don't have to talk all the time. So that's a bonus from me as well. So yes, some people are kind of coming in going, oh, hang on, surely this show should only just be starting. Yet UK clocks have gone back. So to maintain the 6 p.m. Central Time thing, I moved the show, and I do this twice a year. Do it in the last week of October, which is where we are now. And I also do this in March as well for when the clocks go the other way. So right now we've gone back, and then we'll go forward again in March, which I'm very much looking forward to, by the way. I don't like it when it's...
If it's of interest, I've popped a link in the chat as well to
modeling
to the website for the SWAM stuff. So not suggesting you go buy anything, but certainly have a look, and it's quite interesting stuff.
Yeah, so that's cool. That's another good resource to go check out if you're after some very, very good physically modeled sounds, which is in itself a really interesting sample capturing technique. But with that, we are finished for the evening. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming. We peaked at around about 28, which is very good for a slightly earlier than normal Sunday here. So thanks very much, everybody, for coming and for your questions. Thank you again to Rich Cresswell for joining me. It's awesome. And I guess that with the ending of this show, we're now declaring that the Halloween songwriting contest is now officially closed. So if you had an entry, for example, Dwayne, I think, is working frantically on finishing up his. We will let his in, but other than that, the door is now closed to any new entries. And Rich and I will be getting together between now and Wednesday to listen to everything, and we will decide winners. And then on Wednesday's show, which will be again at 11 p.m. UK time, 6 p.m. Central, we will be doing a show together. So you get to see Rich again, and we will be announcing winners, and winners will get prizes. So it's going to be a bit more celebratory. I will actually probably drink a beer on Wednesday, I think.
Yeah, I mean, there's a good chance I might just get really drunk. Why not? No, I won't really.
Yeah, I mean, pronouncing people's names when inebriated would be fun. So yeah, if you want to come and hear us a little bit drunk, then yeah, by all means. But anyway, that's it for tonight, folks. As soon as the theme tune ends for the end of this show, the door for the contest is officially closed. But if you want to continue the discussion from tonight, Billy will be launching an after show Zoom. So if you want to join us over there, you are very, very welcome to. But otherwise, it's a good night from me.
It's a good night from him.
Good night, everybody. The door has closed.
Excrement.